Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys are here. Today on Resistance Live, first of all, we have a little bit of a new camera setup for those of you who are watching on the video on YouTube. But second of all, we have to talk about what happened last night at Trump's DC-based propaganda dinner, because all of this was quite a little bit of schadenfreude joy. Okay, so today for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a black boat neck sweater. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman, and I am sitting in front of my aqua blue green office wall. I'm coming to you as always from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan Land. Okay, so here's the deal. Last night, Trump and Hegseth and Rubio and a bunch of other people in Trump's inner circle went out to dinner in Washington, D.C. And the point of this dinner was propaganda, because essentially what they were trying to do was say that now that the National Guard has invaded Washington, D.C., it's safe enough for Trump and his people to go out to dinner. That was the explicit, express intent of this dinner. And they chose to go to this very fancy, like surf and turf restaurant in Washington, D.C. And when they arrived, they were unexpectedly greeted by activists from an organization called CodePink, more on that in a second, who chanted at Trump and his cabinet, "Free DC, free Palestine, Trump is the Hitler of our time." And it was very loud and very dramatic. And it was a table of only a handful of women. They got within a few feet of Trump's cabinet and also Trump himself. Trump is seen on the multiple videos that have circulated now as scowling. At one point, he kind of tries to crack a smile like he thinks it's funny, and then he gets very agitated and upset when he feels like when he hears what they're saying, orders the Secret Service to get them out of the restaurant, which they do. But one of the fascinating things about the reactions to this is that Rubio and Hegseth in the video look stunned, like absolutely shocked at the idea that these protesters would be saying what they're saying. And so this was a very effective direct action moment, also clearly filmed, posted all over social media, not just by CodePink activists themselves, but also by others in the restaurant. So one of the things that I want people to be aware of, because there is unfortunately a very mainstream left-leaning commentator out there this morning who is claiming this whole thing was staged. And I've already responded to him on Blue Sky that actually is patently false, that CodePink has claimed responsibility for it, and that CodePink is notorious for this kind of thing. So for those of you who don't know what CodePink is, I actually was involved with CodePink all the way back in the day when they were first founded in response to the U.S.-Iraq war in 2002, and attended a couple of protests that they had organized. They have been, since that time, a collective of feminist activists who have the express intent of creating peace, okay? So like their position on the genocide in Gaza is very consistent with their historic positions on war generally. But on top of that, they are notorious for these very stealthy, direct actions taken in surprising ways where they are fearless about getting arrested and they do very dramatic things to make a point. Okay, so one of the things that I have to say here is that claiming that this was somehow staged because they managed to get as close as they did to Hegseth and Rubio and Trump is actually not giving CodePink credit where credit is due. This is what they do. They are also incredibly well connected in Washington, D.C. I happen to know this because CodePink was a co-sponsor of a mass mobilization that I helped to organize in 2019 against family separation. We had connections with their senior leadership at that time. They are profoundly well connected in DC, and not just in the kind of like high level power broker kind of way, but in a way where somebody who wanted to leak something, or even somebody working in a restaurant who would think that they might need to be aware, would get a phone call to CodePink that would let them know. For those who don't remember, by the way, CodePink were among the activists that got arrested during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings for the Supreme Court. They got arrested inside the Capitol building around issues pertaining to healthcare. They are longstanding activists on this kind of stuff. So there's no way that this was staged. Now, there's a lot of speculation on social media this morning about how they got the information that they needed to get a reservation at this fancy restaurant and get in the door. Well, we don't know what kind of help they might have had from inside the restaurant. We don't know what kind of leaks they might have gotten from, say, Pete Hegseth's notoriously leaky staff, or from the State Department about where Marco Rubio was going to be, or for that matter, from inside the White House, which is not known for being anything other than a sieve when it comes to how information gets out of it, okay? But they managed to get a dinner reservation, a table over from Trump and his people, on the basis of information that was conveyed to them by somebody who really cares about their cause and their work. And that in and of itself is remarkable, okay? In addition to that, it definitely is a watershed moment of this administration being called on the carpet. None of these people should have a minute of peace for as long as they are in office in light of what they are doing. Not just in terms of the endorsement of what's happening in Palestine, but also in terms of and Gaza, obviously, but not just in terms of that, but also in terms of what they're doing inside the United States, the kidnapping of our friends and neighbors off the streets, right? The invasion of Washington, D.C., which was one of the points of the protest, right? By the National Guard, by the U.S. military in violation of law. So this kind of work is the sort of stealthy activism work that we have talked about on and off here on this broadcast now for months and months and months. And that also I've done videos about on our sister channel for the Ripple Effect Institute, which you can go check out at Ripple Effect Institute here on YouTube. But I do want everyone to be aware that this kind of direct action is very different. I mean, some people get really mad at me when I talk about the fact that rallies are designed to kind of like cheer people up and build solidarity among communities, but not really something that's going to disrupt the administration. This kind of direct action is disruptive. It is upsetting. You can see it on the faces of the people who were the subject of it. Trump was really not pleased, right? Really not happy about, his little propaganda event about how DC was finally safe to eat out in again, which is a total load of horseshit, was disrupted by this, okay? This kind of thing is something that I am 100% behind, and that I think we all should be 100% behind. Now, it takes a special kind of person to do this kind of work. Again, this is what CodePink is known for. These are people who are not afraid of getting arrested. In fact, you can find footage of CodePink members and even their leadership getting arrested all the way back into the aughts. This is something that is a part of their protocol for how they engage in direct action. So not everybody is cut out for this kind of work. And simultaneously, we need that pushback on every level right now. So this is a very impressive piece of direct action, frankly. I think everybody should be quite grateful to CodePink for it. This was absolutely not staged. If you happen to see anybody claiming that, that is false. And I also very much want people to understand that one of the most immediate forms of pushback against this administration that is likely to have a direct impact is the kind of pushback that makes them very uncomfortable in public. Okay. So again, you can go read you can go to the CodePink website. You can read all about their strategies and what they believe. They are affirmatively nonviolent. They do not carry weapons. They affirm diversity and inclusion in everything that they do. And yet, this was, again, a prime example of how direct action that makes the regime uncomfortable can have an immediate impact. So there's multiple videos going around about this, some from CodePink directly, some from people who were in the restaurant when it happened. And you can go find and support their work. For those who are asking, the website is codepink.org, and you can go check them out. I will say one thing about this. Do not expect, if you join their mailing list, that you are going to get an early heads up about a future event like this. Because again, one of the things that makes this kind of direct action incredibly effective is that it is confined to a small group of people who know that it's going to happen. It is unexpected and it is unadvertised. You want to do this kind of work, you have to build those relationships of trust inside organizations that are doing it, and that takes a long time. Now, I'm not saying don't support them. I'm not saying don't go to their publicly available protests and events. You should, but you should be very aware that, as with any form of stealthy direct action, it is small groups of very trusted people that are generally involved in that. Again, I have to remind you, this is, by the way, how the whole French Resistance worked, where there were small cells of individuals, none of whom were known to each other, who engaged in various forms of action and, got information over shortwave radio. Like, this is what we're talking about when we talk about effective resistance. It's not the kind of thing that is advertised on social media or email lists before it goes down. So again, very interesting, very significant direct action event. And I hope we see a lot more like it. And I suspect we will. Trump was not happy, not happy. Also, I'll just say one other thing about this propagandist event. Trump is on record saying that he could finally go out to dinner again after 4 years of not being able to eat out in DC. Okay, I just have to point out, and that, Melania, he hadn't been out to dinner in 4 years, which is because she hates him. I just want to point out that DC is incredibly safe. Like, I lived there for 6 years, I think, altogether, with the time I was in law school and then the time I actually practiced law in the DC area. It has been safe to go out to dinner there forever, right? And again, crime rates are down. I have to remind everybody, arguing about crime in response to what this administration is saying is lowering ourselves to their level, right? That's where they want the debate to take place. So the debate isn't really about authoritarian domination of our cities. So again, keep in mind, right, that this was designed to be something that Trump could plaster all over the media as a sign that he had ended crime in DC. And lo and behold, what he was met with instead was direct action that stole the story from him. Again, incredibly effective, well thought out, well done. Okay. We have to talk about something that Rachel Maddow covered last night about Epstein that is very relevant to the current moment. So last night, Maddow talked about the fact that there was this moment in the Maxwell interview by Todd Blanche that has not gotten a lot of media coverage, okay? And it was a moment where Maxwell let slip, in response to a question from Todd Blanche, that multiple members of Donald Trump's cabinet were in Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle. And Todd Blanche just let it slide. Did not follow up. I can just tell you, if I was taking a deposition like that, my next question would be who are those people? Name them, right? That's what you would do if you actually wanted that information. Clearly, Todd Blanche did not. But, again, one of the things that I have to remind everybody of is that, as I've said from the very beginning, from the moment in July when the DOJ said they were not releasing the Epstein files, this is not just about Donald Trump. In fact, it is much more likely that in addition to Donald Trump, there are very significant Republican donors and people who have given money to things like Trump's inauguration. Because, by the way, let's not forget, all those tech bros were dumping $1 million here and $1 million there into that fund that he is trying to protect. So it's about him, but it's also about big Republican donors and figures. Again, we don't know who, but I have to say this is yet another reason why the pressure absolutely has to be kept up to release the files from the DOJ. I got to remind everybody, because there's a lot of confusion about this, that the birthday book that has gotten so much coverage and that we talked about on yesterday's broadcast came from the Epstein estate itself. It is the Epstein estate that has currently responded to the House Oversight subpoena, not the DOJ. And what the DOJ has, which we know they have because there are court-filed documents listing what they took out of Epstein's residences, are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of documents, photographs, videotapes that cover Epstein's life, what he did, the girls that were abused, and the people who abused them with him. So we need those files. That's really what it's about. The DOJ has to release the totality of the files. Man, it's a lot. But again, I think this point is very well taken that Rachel made, that it's not just about Trump, it's also about his own inner circle who are potentially implicated in all of this. Okay. This morning, an excerpt from Kamala Harris's upcoming memoir about the 2024 campaign dropped in, I think, The Atlantic. I hope I have that right. I might be misstating it. It's short, but it's really interesting because what it talks about is how the people in the White House, when Biden had decided that he was going to run for re-election, felt that they couldn't put pressure on him to not run. And the way in which, even though apparently there was a lot of concern about him running for a second term, the perception was that Joe Biden would not receive well the advice of those in his inner circle that he should not run. I have to say that it's very juicy. It also discusses the fact that Biden apparently wasn't, despite Harris's efforts, as front and center on abortion rights as she wanted him to be. I am very interested to read the whole book, but I will just say one other thing. I happen to agree with Angus King, who is out there this morning on Blue Sky talking about what this signals in terms of what Harris is planning on doing next. Because it's a very obvious break from the Biden administration for her to come out now and talk about what was happening behind the scenes and how folks thought he shouldn't run again, but they didn't feel like they could make that case effectively to him. And what that means in the context of then the loss of the 2024 election. This seems to be an effort by Kamala Harris to separate herself from the past, and perhaps to set herself up for a 2028 run. Now, I have to say that just like Angus, I'm very focused on the here and now, right? Like, it's September 10th of 2025. Horrible things are happening now. We have to be fighting back now. Now is the moment to organize in our communities for 2026 and 2028 so that, like, we're not doing that horrible thing that always fails of only organizing for electoral cycles. There's so much work that has to be done, and it's really not the time to talk about like whether or not she should be the nominee, whether or not she will be the nominee. But I will say this. Like Angus, I take a lot of confidence in the fact that she seems to be positioning herself as a fighter, and somebody who is invested in turning the Democratic Party around right now into something of an oppositional force. Whether or not she's actually going to be able to do that is anybody's guess. But this is sort of a shot across the bow that a new version of Kamala Harris is coming, and we'll have to see how this plays out in the context of like the midterms, because the timing of this is very interesting. I'm very curious about whether or not she plans to be out there making an argument for deeply progressive candidates who are running for office. It's something to keep an eye on, I guess is what I'm saying about it. It's something to keep an eye on. It's a really interesting signal at the moment. Okay. Last night, Poland shot down a bunch of Russian drones that had crossed over the border into Poland. This was the second night in a row that Russian drones that were apparently targeting Ukraine crossed the Polish border. And by all indications, this is intentional on the part of Vladimir Putin. This is something, again, to keep an eye on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's certainly got NATO on edge, because obviously Poland is a member of NATO. And if Poland experiences a direct incursion or threat from Russia, then the common defense provisions of the NATO treaty can be invoked and we'll be off to war. So very interesting kind of development, a little scary. Frankly, I saw it when I woke up this morning and I was like, uh-oh, because it has that edgy feeling to it of like, what's the significance of this in the bigger picture? So again, something to keep an eye on. All right. Today on the Patreon feed, again, I'm going to remind you all there is a 20% off discount running between now and Friday using the code podcast on annual subscriptions. Head on over there and do that if you would care to. And I do just have to flag, by the way, we are farming our audio out to podcasting platforms right now. There was a glitch yesterday. We're working on that. But our feed is supposed to be up and running again. And our audio is now coming at you on all major podcasting platforms. If you didn't see it yesterday on iTunes and Spotify, it's because we had a little bit of a background situation, but it's being rectified. My team is working on it. in conjunction with other people at other platforms. And so stay tuned if you couldn't find it, but you will be able to. Nonetheless, our code podcast will get you 20% off an annual subscription at patreon.com/resistancelive between now and at least Friday, and maybe a little bit longer, given the kind of glitch we've had on the background. So stay tuned for that. I was asked on the Patreon feed this morning, where of course you can ask me questions every day, about a constitutional convention. And I'm not sure where folks are getting this, because this is the second day in a row that there's been a question like this on the Patreon feed, which always makes me think that there's some kind of circulated thing going on that I can't find in all of my research, but that is hitting people over Facebook or somewhere else, that most likely lacks context. Because every time I get asked a question about a constitutional convention, my answer is always the same. Okay, so I'm going to give you the same answer now, but I do want to tell you now, even if you've heard about this before, that there is a concern about this that people should be aware of, all right, before everybody decides it's a good idea, because apparently it's somebody on the left claiming it's a good idea. It's a terrible idea, okay? I want to make it really clear. A constitutional convention at this moment would be disastrous. It would be like literally the end of America, and we're already kind of there anyway, all right? So constitutional conventions have to be called through a particular methodology that requires a certain percentage of the states, their state legislatures, to call for a constitutional convention. A constitutional convention has been on the agenda of the far right wing for the last 40 years. This is one reason why they've been striving to get Republican control of state legislatures, because if they get enough of them, and they don't have them now, but they're kind of close, they could call for a constitutional convention and rewrite the entire Constitution of the United States. Now, let me just say something about this, all right? Because this is really important stuff. The idea that somehow the left calling a constitutional convention, when we don't have, by the way, the number of states that we would need to do it, really does not take into account how a constitutional convention works. And part of the problem right now with so many of our legislatures being controlled by like MAGA Republicans is that any constitutional convention would end up being a free-for-all for them to actually put into the US Constitution their retrogressive fascist policies and ensconce them in the Constitution of the United States. Okay? I just have to say that anybody who is advocating for this does not know what they are talking about. Like, they really are putting people in a very dangerous mindset that somehow we could fix all of this with a constitutional convention. Actually, a constitutional convention would probably be the most dangerous thing to happen to America since the Civil War. Yes, I said it. Okay. Like, it is a terrible idea in this era, an absolutely terrible idea. You want to make sure that like everybody can have any gun they want without any background check, no national registry, no any domestic violence history. Literally anyone can walk around with an Uzi. Call for a constitutional convention. You want to make sure that abortion is banned in the US Constitution. Call for a constitutional convention. You want to make sure that we return to Black citizens being considered 3/5 of a citizen and having no voting rights. Call for a constitutional convention. You want, by the way, the right of women to vote that was ensconced in the 19th Amendment to be erased. You should call for a constitutional convention, because that's what we're facing down. Okay. This is not a moment where it is at all a good idea to be advocating for something like that. And so if you see something like that being circulated on social media as some way to save the republic, you should recognize it as one of two things, either coming from a place of deep ignorance about how the legal system in our country works and how constitutional conventions are called and what their purpose is and how they work, or you should consider it to be, and I don't often say this here, a psyop. And what I mean by that is like propaganda that is designed to manipulate you into supporting something that would destroy democracy. Okay. Like, please be careful about this stuff. Like, seriously, be very, very careful. All right. That was the last question for today. I'm going to answer one question from one of our subscribers here, just about our discount over on Patreon. It was supposed to be for everybody. We know that now existing subscribers may not be able to upgrade at a 20% discount, but you always can upgrade to an annual subscription and get 10% off. So we are working on that background thing. But if you are a new subscriber and you want 20% off an annual discount, you should head on over there and use that code podcast. But if you're an existing subscriber and you want 10% off, no matter what, you can also upgrade. So we'll keep you guys posted on how that's all working. But I just want everybody to be aware that, you know, obviously We are discounting our annual subscriptions right now, new subscribers particularly, and we're working on it for existing ones. All right, my friends, lots of love to you today. Thanks as always for being here. Don't forget to like this broadcast, subscribe here and on all your podcasting channels, and I will catch you all back here tomorrow at regular time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.